The FDI policy always says it is the FEMA regulations which prevail in case of a dispute or a difference. So therefore you go to the FEMA regulations. Now I don't have an answer under the FEMA regulations. So what do? Then I need to apply to RBI or to SYPB for a clarity. So because of a problem in drafting, this is arising. They have amended after issuing regulation 14, they amended the control definition, but they forgot to amend this definition. I think this is something which we at the chamber would also make a representation to RBI that you need to do away with the second definition, which is causing all the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, just one point, supplementing to this 50-50, I perhaps mentioned it in my yesterday's presentation, that if it is a 50-50 control, almost equal between resident and non-resident, because the intention of the regulation when they came in from both sides, like the FIPB side or the RBI side, the Indian should retain control. If the residents have not control, most likely the authorities are likely to say that this is going to be foreign owned and control and not Indian owned and control. So that's how you will have to budget the way forward accordingly, because the qualification is not going to be the other way around.
Right.
So that's what needs to be kept in mind. Maybe the tiebreaker will make whichever way, but the interpretation is going to remain more or less the same. They're not going to change that. Alright, so let's go to 4.16. Expenses incurred by parent company abroad on behalf of WASP in India. And they're saying, does this constitute violation of FEMA? Please advise whether the ECB issue has been triggered. Now, the whole thing is, there are 2-3 things over, one, before we actually answer this question, there are 2-3 things which are more relevant and which is not coming out from the fact of the carrier. First of all, why has the parent company spent these expenses? Is it spending for every of its fully owned subsidiaries overseas? Is it under a global arrangement and it has paid to some non-resident? Are the expenditure something incurred in India, which the Indian company should have paid directly? Who has contracted for these expenses? I think that's a fundamental question. If the Indian company had contracted for these expenses and if it has been paid by the parent, then in my view it is nothing but a financing arrangement. And if it is a financing arrangement, it does violate the FEMA borrowing and lending in foreign exchange regulation. If it's a foreign, if it's the payment in foreign exchange, and if it is in India, then the borrowing and lending in rupees regulation. So I'm not sure whether this will directly get classified as an ECB, because ECB is a more structured borrowing under the regulation, but definitely the genesis of how the entire arrangement emerges, I think that's going to be more relevant. But for example, if you've seen the cases of, there is a software which is globally procured and then the cost is allocated to the respective entity, and if you're just doing a cross charge, then it is not expenditure incurred on behalf, because the original contract indeed belonged to the parent company. So therefore, I think if it is just a pure financing, if the Indian boss has just taken the benefit of the funds available with the parent and has not paid it for 4 years, it is definitely a violation of FEMA.
Shabir bhai, it could happen that the Indian company is not incorporated. The foreign parent has paid for the machinery. Then when it gets incorporated, they will pay, but because of the losses, they could not pay for 2 years.
No, but see, Hinesh bhai, the whole thing is, if the supply happens after they've paid, before the incorporation, then the supplier for the importer on record will be the parent. No, there is no on behalf payment here. They are not going to pay.
No.
So I don't understand.
Supplier would be the original.
We cannot, because you've paid, you've taken the ownership then. No? I'm not sure whether the supplier will transfer to a company under incorporation. So why would you do it that way? You would rather take the ownership and then do the supply. Easier way of doing it. I think this is more, if some running expenditures are paid here and there, and if it is not pure reimbursement, then it's a sure problem. So as I said, I think the fundamental here is who has contracted this liability and why has the parent company paid. If the liability is contracted by the wholly owned subsidiary and the parent has paid merely because it has funds, and so because this is indirectly a working capital finance, if it is for a working, if it's a running expenditure. So therefore, in my view, it does violate FEMA, and even when you sort of approach RBI, you may not get a very friendly welcome there.
4.16 on valuation. Now transfer of shares from non-resident to residents has to be at a price not higher than DCF as per the current guidelines. I just mentioned about the monetary policy asking to do away with them. Till such time as it is done away with, it has to be at a price not higher than DCF. If you want to follow any other method, you need to approach RBI for approval. So even though you may get a low value or the business is shut down, it has to be at DCF. But that's only on the valuation part. The bigger question here is that are you getting into real estate business by getting into a company which has large real estate? That is an overriding question which you need to look at. So is it a backdoor entry into real estate business? If yes, then valuation aside, you can't get into FDI for that. So that is also something. But regarding the question on valuation, you cannot factor in the value of the real estate property unless you are going to show that you're going to develop the property and you're going to get cash flow from development and factor. Then also you need to consider Press Note 2 of 2005. So on valuation, no option but to follow DCF, but also look at the bigger question of whether it is real estate business in the first place. So golf course. Okay, so then hospitality and tourism sector should not be covered under the real estate Press Note. Here there was a proposal by DIPP that when there is a mixed use project, that is you have hospitality and tourism and you have real estate project, if the mixed use, if the tourism is more than 50% of the total project, then it should be exempt from 2 of 2005 conditions. FIPP has not agreed to the proposal by DIPP and it's yet continued as it is. Therefore, you need to see whether 2 of 2005 conditions would be satisfied in such a case. But valuation, no escape route. DCF only. Or go to RBI for permission for non-DCF.
So the question is, there won't be any question by the regulator at a later date that you have transferred the real estate which is valued at a substantially higher price, but by adopting DCF you have transferred it at a lower price.
No, I have followed your method. You laid down the method, I followed it.
So you win some, you lose some.
Yeah.
It's okay. So question number 4.18 on valuation. I mean, I'm not a valuation expert, but Anup may have been better placed here to respond to this one. Nevertheless, it talks about companies permitted to buy back shares per circular 86 on return on equity. Now the query is if share is purchased at X, how the repurchase price is calculated. Now I didn't understand this question at all. Because the return on equity method has been defined there in the formula. It is, I think, profit after tax divided by net worth. So I don't know how it has to do with the repurchase price. I didn't understand the question. So
see this optionality clauses. What they are saying is, if you are exercising your option and pursuant to the exercise of the option, you are getting an exit. Then the exit price cannot be more than the ROE basis which you are getting. So you look at the compounded annual growth rate which you are getting by virtue of the exit. So you invested at 100, you are getting an exit price at 120. That gives you say a CAGR of 5%. If the ROE of the company is 4%, then you cannot get a 5% exit. It has to be capped at 4%. If the return on equity is 6%, you can go ahead with 5%. However, this circular only applies when you are getting an exit pursuant to the optionality clauses. Supposing you don't exercise your option, and it is a direct transfer of shares, then it is not higher than DCF. And the recent FAQs of RBI have clarified this ambiguity that there are two exit pricings. If you exercise the option clause, it is ROE. If you don't exercise the option clause, then it is DCF. So look at whichever is more beneficial. And there is a third which I would add to it. If you exercise the option clause for a CCD or a CCP, then ROE does not apply. ROE only applies to equity shares options. If it is an option clause executed on CCD or CCP, it is as per the value or any internationally accepted pricing formula. So there are three exit valuations: equity option, ROE, equity or CCD transfer, DCF, option for CCD or CCP, internationally accepted valuation formula. Look at whichever is the most preferable and based on the facts of the case, and then adopt that mechanism. And RBI has so far confirmed that in so many words in the recent FAQ. So that's a good point. But the answer is ROE means as per PAT divided by net worth. Annualized rate should not be more than that.
yeah, but I think if there is anybody who has framed this question here, I mean, I still don't understand where he is coming from. So
I think important here.
If you can just clarify. We have first of all under the optionality clause hopefully.
Also, because the recent circular, you do not understand. When you enter into the company at a valuation, then you have applied the DCF valuation. which is much higher than the ROE valuation. So now I have purchased at 200 rupees, and because of the ROE, my valuation comes down substantially, and then I'm supposed to get a higher price, but I'm getting a lower price. So what should I do? That's the question.
That is true. It's like, song in Hotel California. You can come in any time you like, but you can only leave when I like. So you come in at TCF, but you exit at ROE, and that's the biggest problem with this. And you can easily bypass this if it was a CCD or a CCP. So what all private equity funds are now doing is coming in only at CCD and CCP. Why would I come in at equity? Don't convert till I want an exit, till I'm sure. Because if it is CCD, CCP, I can do away with this pricing. Hopefully once this monetary policy guidelines are notified, no valuation formulas at all. Everything as per internationally accepted valuation methodology, we'll have a lot more flexibility. So I'm waiting with bated breath to see what the guidelines are going to be. 4.18 exchange traded derivatives. Now this is an interesting question and no clear-cut answer. See, if you look at the master circular on FDI, foreign investment in India, it says NRIs are allowed to invest in futures and options segment of the exchange out of the rupee funds held in India on non-repatriation basis. It further adds a line, the funds will not be repatriable. If you look at the $1 million scheme under NRO, there is no embargo at any place which says that you cannot repatriate exchange traded funds, or it does not say that other than this. It says balances lying in the NRO account are eligible for $1 million per year. So then, do you look at both together and do you say one overrides the other? Which one should apply? I believe there should not be any embargo. But looking at twice they are harping in the master circular that you cannot repatriate, it may be advisable to get a clarification from RBI, although looking at what they may answer, I can always preempt that. But I think it's better than to take a chance. Even the AD may not like to take a chance on this, and he may also require let's go to RBI for that, because of the fact that twice they have said you cannot repatriate. A clarification on this in the next master circular could be helpful, and probably we could ask RBI this question, because they have been adding clarifications in the master circular. So the new one is due in July. So let's probably write to them that what happens when one circular says non-repatriable, NRO says repatriable, no strings attached, which one survives and which one overrides.
FDI through issue transfer of participating rights in oil fields. Friends, I think
yeah, I know.
So this is this is actually, you're right, this is a departure from the normal rule for shares, and in fact it is a one-way traffic because it only covers transfer or issue from resident to non-resident. The other side is not covered. And I think fundamentally this is happening because many non-residents have been directly acquiring rights in oil fields, or they have been purchasing the rights from the residents, and therefore there was a need that the pricing happens at the right amount, and therefore the right amount of foreign exchange flows to India. So I think this has been done with that objective in mind. I don't know the genesis of why this came in, but it does exist. It's, as I said, it's a one-way. It covers only issue or transfer from resident to non-resident, and not vice versa. And there is a reporting which is prescribed, and everything else which is prescribed in line with that of share. And basically the intention is that the right amount of fair value of foreign exchange comes into India. That's it. There's nothing more to that in this particular note.
For wholesale cash and carry trading. Now this is
We have a question. The real question was that in the scheduled world, permits only company as an entity, and this is nothing but a activity of a branch of a foreign company. So what is the intention of RBI to consider this under the FDI policy? They could have said perhaps you can come through notification 22.
I'll explain. So that's Paresh bhai, that's a very valid. See, typically what will happen is if a foreign company acquires such right, it will either operate this right by establishing a project office here, or there will be a operator or runner of the project. And it so happens in oil that there are many participants and many owners. And generally the project office is established only by the operator, not by all the non-residents. And therefore, in my view, it could not come in the other, establishment of branch office or place of business in India. It has rightly come because the project office will come much later. Only after you've got the right, depending on how much right you have got, what the parties inter se want to arrange the affairs, and thereafter how you choose to set up your project office. So that, in my view, is a very later phenomena. And therefore, this is a stage before the setup of the project office when you are actually acquiring the oil field. So that's where perhaps it has come rightly in FEMA 20 and not in any other regulation.
4.21 Wholesale cash and carry trading. What is the significance of the logic behind capping the sale to group companies at 25%? Now this embargo came in at a time when multi-brand retailing FDI was not permissible. This was prior to September 2012. What used to happen is that companies would invest in wholesale cash and carry trading. These wholesale cash and carry trading would use the money for supply chain management, back-end infrastructure, and then sell all the products to retail entities set up by a joint venture partner. So if you look at Walmart Bharti, Walmart Bharti would get the FDI, and there were 20 to 22 retail outlets which Bharti had set up, which would then be supplied by the wholesale cash and carry outlet. So what the government was looking upon is the wholesale cash and carry a conduit for carrying on multi-brand retailing. So you get FDI and then use all the goods for only group company entities, and therefore you are bypassing in spirit, not in letter. To plug that, they said only 25% of your turnover you can sell to group companies. So that was a big blow to companies like Bharti, Walmart or Tesco, Tata, because all of them were using the front end from the Indian party and the back end by the foreign party. That was the original intention. Post multi-brand retail FDI being liberalized, there has not been any change in that. Probably there is a need for now having a relook on that, but the original significance or the underlying significance was that.
4.22 Transfer of shares. Can you guide us on a general rule what circumstances and transfer one has to approach FIPB and not RBI? So I think yesterday in my presentation I've sort of given almost perhaps most of the key cases that would go to the FIPB. So I'll perhaps skip that. The second question is Regulation 9 provides for certain transfers when no approval is required. This does not include transfer of shares by NRI to another non-resident who is not an NRI. It is learned that such a transfer requires an approval of the FIPB and not RBI. That's not correct. A transfer from an NRI to NR will require approval of RBI and not FIPB, subject to there being no other sectoral restrictions. And RBI, fairly routinely grants this approval. I've not seen at least in quite some time in case of rejection. You have to just show how the NRI is invested, the valuation at which it is being transferred, and such approvals are fairly, routinely granted by RBI.
There was no provision on this earlier, but in last year's master circular, a last line has been added. Provided any transfer from an NRI to another NRI will require prior RBI approval. So now it's expressly clear you need only RBI approval. Till last year it was not there. Last year's master circular has added that. We now go to ODI questions. So chapter 5, 5.1. In case if Indian party constitutes two Indian companies, then is it necessary to open the bank account in the same branch of an authorized dealer? So if two or more people come together, yes, they must use the same authorized dealer for making the investment. The rule is 180 qua 1 UIN. So if there is a unique ID number for one JV or WOS, whether you have one or you have multiple Indian parties, you would have to use 180 branch only. You cannot say company A Indian party uses 180 and B uses the secondary. If they have bank accounts with different authorized dealers, then how to comply with the regulations? So 180 for each. But you can have different ADs for different UIN numbers. So even if one company has multiple joint ventures abroad, one in Dubai, one in Singapore, one in Mauritius, he can have 3 authorized dealers. Rule is again 1 UIN, 180, not one Indian party, 180.
They cannot do it.
But two guys need to come together, but one having 2 can have 2 different authorized dealers. Is the reporting in form ODI to be made to one of the authorized dealer and remittance made through another? Will that be sufficient? No. All transactions and all communications in respect of one UIN have to be routed through 180 only. Again, golden rule. If you follow, all questions fall into place. 1 UIN, 180. If an Indian company has invested in a company in Singapore and wants to later on change the AD, what is the process? The process is you need an NOC from the outgoing AD and you need RBI's permission for that. This was not clarified, now it's there in the master circular. And last year at our seminar also, I think RBI clarified this point at the advanced FEMA workshop. That was a lot of clarity came through in that workshop.
5.2, Indian party under investigation. Yeah, that's correct. If you are under an investigation by any enforcement agency or any regulatory authority, you are generally not permitted to avail the automatic route, and you will have to seek a specific nod from the RBI. And in fact, this has I've seen that being applied in a practical case, and perhaps in India the way our the mindset is you are guilty if you are under investigation, and even if you are proved not to be guilty eventually. So that's perhaps where it is. I mean, they don't want to take a chance that if you are under investigation, you are denied the automatic route and you will have to go under the approval. In fact, there was also one case I remember, perhaps not under the outbound regulation, but there was similar rule under the ECB guideline as well. And I think one of the Reliance Group entity was prohibited from availing the auto route, and they had taken some action, including the High Court. It's a fairly old matter. So such precedents are there in other regulations as well, which one will need to keep in mind.
Yeah, the case which he's referring to is correct. That's of the Reliance Capital who accessed ECB rules, but a group company was under investigation. In spite of that, the RBI said even group companies are prohibited, and they accessed ECBs under the automatic route. The matter went to compounding, and the compounding authority gave the order against the group. They went to the High Court. After that, even I have lost tab of what has happened, but what he says is correct, that the moment you are under the scanner, you are denied the access under the auto route. There is a concept, a myth prevailing amongst the legal fraternity. It's only when you are proven guilty. That's untrue. Recently, just about 2 months ago, we had an instance where a company is under ROC investigation, and they have got a legal opinion that you are not prohibited from accessing the automatic route. We wrote to RBI, and RBI has categorically denied. You need to apply under the approval route. So, at the moment there is a notice against you, show cause notice, the auto route stops.
So in fact, there is a wider, Anup, I just want to add, people are in fact, if you get an income tax notice, are you under investigation? An assessment is on whether you will be prohibited from taking automatic route. So you really don't know where to stop. On a lighter side, assessment is not an investigation, but nevertheless, there are even fear factors. If you are, for example, you are under a search by the tax office, you may be denied the automatic route.
The question was raised in the background that currently, because of the suspicious transaction being reported to FIU, most of the inquiries and the reference by the operator to the FIU is found place in terms of release notice or some authorities in India, and therefore, just for the explaining some transaction in the bank account, this notice is issued to on various companies, including NRIs. So whether such a widespread adverse implication can take place in terms of inability of the Indian parties to do the transaction. That's the background. So the answer is difficulty.
Yes.
So I think Paresh bhai, the way the regulators are seeing it is something very important for the government and them. I don't think they'll have any sympathy in that sense for such cases, saying whatever it is, if there is a smoke, there must be a fire, and I don't think they'll probably look at for any. But I've seen such approvals coming, so it's not that the Reserve Bank is quite closed about it, they're quite open about it. You tell them what's the investigation, and that they would take into account and give you, and I've seen such approvals practically in real life, so that's not a problem.
5.3, unincorporated entities abroad would include proprietary concern, partnership firms, AOPs, trusts, unincorporated societies, and unincorporated limited partnerships, not LLPs but LPs. So a branch could also fall under that. So that would be falling under the Navratna PSU unincorporated entity overseas investment. Yeah.
but 5.4 guarantee. Actually, again here the facts are not very clear. Nevertheless, what I infer is that there could be cases where there are multiple guarantees given for the same transaction. Yeah, if you can, because I don't think the facts, at least to me, are that clear.
In the overseas investment area,
Yeah.
the guarantees are to be counted within the overall limit of 100% of the capital. The capital plus loans plus guarantees.
Okay.
Then in the master circular they say all forms of guarantees to be included. Guarantee is given by the Indian party, guarantee given by the resident promoter, and the guarantee is given by the banks. Now, when a bank is giving guarantee, it is comfort being given by the Indian promoter that I am giving a corporate guarantee to enable you to give the guarantee on behalf of the WOS. So the promoter's guarantee, corporate guarantees and bank guarantees, they are counted 3 times. That is what it appears from the master circular. So can you clarify that? The question.
So, but Paresh bhai, have you come across a practical case? Because I have yet to come across a practical case where all the 3 have given guarantee for the same transaction. Because generally, if a bank is giving guarantee, the promoter will not give a guarantee. Now, that's what I have seen. If there are 2 guarantees which are given for the same transaction, currently the way the law is worded, you have to count them twice. That's the way it is. But I have yet to see, so there would be some gap. For example, if bank is giving guarantee for 100, and even if the promoter has given a deposit, it will be 20 or it will not be the same 100. It can't be because the economics doesn't work, Because the bank will definitely charge you for 100. It doesn't make, so I have not seen a case where generally I have seen if the bank guarantees is given, promoter does not give any other guarantee on behalf of the boss, even to the bank, because he has a lot of other exposures with the bank. He simply pays the bank guarantee and that's it. If the promoter gives a guarantee, the bank gives a guarantee, they may be disproportionate in size and both will need to be counted. I have not seen all the 3 guarantees. That is by the Indian party, their promoters and the bank. I have yet to see a practical case on that line. But so Paresh, just to say that there is a flexibility given in the law as to whomsoever you may give the guarantee. Now, if the guarantees are given, they will aggregate the guarantee. Currently, the way the law is, there is no provision in segregating those guarantees. So, for a transaction of 100, you are giving guarantee of 300. Unfortunately, you will have to add. And if you cross that 100% ceiling, then you will have to go and explain to RBI that this is inadvertent. And therefore, please allow me to go ahead with this transaction. But the whole point is, I have practically not seen all 3 together. I have seen 2 together but in disproportionate ratio. So that's what I have seen. So maybe if there is anybody else who has a real life case, maybe happy to take that on.
So these margins, every margin is given for the corporate guarantee is always given for the issuing bank guarantee.
Correct. So,
but their margin is not going to be counted here. No, it's only the corporate guarantee because margin is a separate investment.
Correct, because you have not given a guarantee on behalf of your boss. It depends on what linkage you create. Because under the banking regulation, even letter of comfort, I believe, is covered under the ambit of guarantee. Therefore, it all depends on how you have placed and what dotted lines you have created. So, if you ask me if you have given a direct deposit and a direct comfort, then there is a double counting which needs to be taken into account. And right now, as I said, the way the law is, both will need to be counted. And in fact, there was sometime an amendment back when the RBI specifically clarified. See, earlier the view was the AD bank's guarantee was not to be counted. And then I think they brought in the last circular or something that even the AD bank's guarantee will be counted in the 100% limit. So now it is imperatively clear. In fact, we were always taking the view AD bank guarantee has to be counted, but there was a school of thought which suggested otherwise. And I think post the circular now it is very clear that both the guarantees will have to be added the way it is.
So the answer to the question was, should RBI issue a clarification? Yes. And therefore we should make a representation. But the answer is right, it would be counted. 5.5, do you need to file ODI for every installment which is remitted? Yes. Each installment requires an ODI. And that was also RBI's view at our last advanced SEMA workshop where we had the RBI participation. Whether the series of amount requested in section D are chronologically lower, no, I don't think they would generally all be the same. And whether amount of remittance can be lower than the financial commitment. If it is an installment, yes, or if the remittance, if it's a combination of remittance plus capitalization of export or stock swap, then your remittance may be less or it may be nil. But you may have other than remittance, so then your